Today's episode contains sensitive topics, such as sexual and physical abuse. So if you are sensitive to this content, please listen at your own discretion. What is art without the muse? Many of Western art's most famous works are depictions of women. But who were these women? Do they have their own stories to share with the world? Hello and welcome to ArtMuse, a podcast that aims to reshape the ways in which we interpret well-known works of art by paying dues to the women whose images have been immortalized, but whose names and stories have been wrongfully overlooked. While these women's faces are familiar to viewers around the world, their identities have been largely forgotten. Together we will explore the important lives and legacy of the female muse and appreciate these works of art from a new perspective, through the eyes of the women whose image stares back at us. Is the muse in actuality just as, if not more, important than the artists themselves? And I'm your host, Grace Anna. As author Paula Uruburu wrote, in December 1900, she came to New York City at the tender age of 15 as an artist model with nothing but her looks, and became an overnight sensation. To the reporters who followed her mercurial rise as a celebrity, hers seemed like a fairy tale existence. She generated more newspaper sales and publicity than William Randolph Hearst himself could have imagined. She was a modern-day Cinderella who overnight became the glittering girl model of Gotham. But this real-life Cinderella would eventually wake up from her fairy tale dream and find herself in a living nightmare. Within just a few years in New York, Gotham's it girl would wind up at the heart of the crime of the century and one of the most notorious murders in all of American history. Listeners, today I introduce you to the artist model, chorus girl, actress, and bewitching beauty, Evelyn Nesbit. Evelyn was born on Christmas Day in 1884 in Tarentum, Pennsylvania. When Evelyn was 11 years old, her family relocated to Pittsburgh, where her father found work as a lawyer. But Evelyn's world would come crashing down when a few months later, her father suddenly died at the age of 40, throwing Evelyn and her mother and brother into immediate poverty. The family lost their home and all of their belongings and had to squeeze into a single room of a boarding house. Soon finding themselves struggling to afford enough food to survive, Evelyn and her brother were forced to join the workforce, despite being under the legal working age. Fortunately, when Evelyn was 14 years old, she was discovered by a painter in Philadelphia, who asked Evelyn to model for her. Not before long, all of Philadelphia's top artists began scrambling to have this young girl with remarkable good looks model for them as well. In 1900, Evelyn moved to New York City with her mother in hopes of furthering her modeling career. She quickly won the attention of famed painters James Carroll Beckwith and Frederick Church, both of whom she modeled for on several occasions. Evelyn also modeled for the illustrator Charles Gibson, becoming one of his famous Gibson girls. After a few months, Evelyn gravitated towards photography and began modeling for the city's top fashion photographers. She soon found herself as the face of popular advertisements and on the cover of leading magazines. She was even featured in many company calendars, including Coca-Cola's, becoming one of America's earliest pinup girls. By the age of 15, Evelyn was on top of the world and seen as the it girl of the Gilded Age. In 1901, after a year in the Big Apple, Evelyn was offered a role as a chorus girl on Broadway. Still modeling by day, Evelyn soon became a Broadway star by night, capturing the attention of New York's most powerful men. Unfortunately, one of these men was the renowned architect Stanford White, who designed some of New York's most famous buildings, such as the original Madison Square Garden and Penn Station. In awe of her remarkable beauty, the 47-year-old married architect sought after the then 16-year-old Evelyn. Learning that she had lost her father at a young age, White pretended to play a paternal role, showering Evelyn in gifts and supporting her and her family. What Evelyn did not know was that White had a history of predatory behavior and was grooming Evelyn to later take advantage of her. After earning her trust, White convinced Evelyn's mother to travel back to Pittsburgh, leaving Evelyn in his care. The next day, White drugged and raped Evelyn in one of his secret apartments. White not only stole Evelyn's virginity, but also her childhood innocence, and Evelyn's life would never be the same. Though it may be hard for some to understand, Evelyn continued a romantic relationship with White after he assaulted her. At only 16 years old, Evelyn was at the hands of one of New York's most powerful men. And more than this, continuing their relationship meant that Evelyn could bury away her hurt, forcing herself to believe that White really cared about her. But after a few months, Evelyn discovered White's little black book, and with it that he was pursuing a number of other underage girls. Hurt by his promiscuity, Evelyn was ready to move on. After a brief affair with the actor John Barrymore, Evelyn was introduced to Harry Thaw, a fellow Pittsburgh native who was heir to his father's multi-million-dollar fortune. Thaw had attended over 40 of Evelyn's performances and began to pursue her with such fervor that it bordered on harassment. Though she repeatedly rejected him, Thaw eventually wore Evelyn down, and she agreed to travel to Europe with him in 1903. What Evelyn did not know at the time was that Thaw had his own history of sadistic behavior and had whipped a number of young women in the past. What Evelyn also did not know was that Stanford White was Thaw's sworn enemy, and her association with White was likely why Thaw pursued her to begin with. It was on their trip to Europe that Evelyn told Thaw about White's assault on her. Though Thaw initially seemed sympathetic towards Evelyn, a few days later, he locked Evelyn in her bedroom while he beat her with the whip, and then proceeded to rape her himself. When Evelyn finally returned to New York, she was a shell of a girl. Once New York's brightest star, Evelyn descended into a dark depression. Though it may also be hard to understand, Evelyn agreed to marry Thaw in the spring of 1905, after nearly 2 years of persistent proposals. Evelyn knew that if her past with White were exposed, her reputation would be ruined, and she would have no other suitable marriage prospects. And, with Thaw's multi-million-dollar fortune, Evelyn could at least guarantee herself financial stability. But though Evelyn was not enthused about their marriage, she could never have imagined just how disastrous their union would be. Just a year later, Thaw booked theater tickets for himself and Evelyn at Madison Square Garden. White was not in attendance, but just as the play was coming to a close, he appeared and sat in his reserved seat. While Evelyn walked towards the elevators to leave, she did not notice Thaw slip past her and make his way back towards the audience. In front of nearly 1,000 bystanders, Thaw pulled out a hand pistol, stood 2 feet behind White, and fired 2 shots into his head. Stanford White was killed instantly. Thaw stumbled back and shouted the words, "I did it because he ruined my wife." Evelyn stood immobilized with fear and felt like she was thrust into a nightmare that she could not wake up from. And unfortunately, that nightmare was only going to get worse. In the subsequent trial, which famously was dubbed the trial of the century, Evelyn had to testify in court and recount White's assault. Not only was Evelyn forced to relive her trauma, but the entire country watched with eager eyes as she shared the darkest moment of her life. The trial received such an unprecedented amount of publicity that the jurors were forced to be sequestered for the first time in American history. The trial ended with a hung jury, forcing a retrial. A year later, Thaw was acquitted on grounds of insanity and was sent to a state hospital, where he spent the next 8 years. Though Evelyn had been through so much at the hands of both White and Thaw, she was now finally free of their grasps, with one in his grave and the other institutionalized. Evelyn eventually divorced Thaw in 1915, but not before Thaw gave Evelyn the greatest gift of her life, her son, Russell. Evelyn gave birth to Russell in 1910, after he was conceived during a conjugal visit to Thaw at the institution, though Thaw denied paternity for the rest of his life. Evelyn remarried in 1916, this time to her dance partner Jack Clifford. But unfortunately, this marriage was short-lived. Evelyn continued to perform over the next many years and appeared as an actress in a number of silent films between the years of 1914 and 1934. She also took up sculpture and ceramics, and even became an art teacher in her later age. She spent the final year of her life in a nursing home in California, where she died of natural causes in 1967, at the age of 82. Today, many of Stanford White's buildings still exist and have become some of New York's most cherished monuments. But who still remembers Evelyn Nesbit and the many other girls who White sexually assaulted? These monuments also stand as reminders of the lives that were irreparably changed at the hands of their designer. As author Paula Uruburu declared, much like Marilyn Monroe later in the century, Evelyn Nesbit was an icon of her age, created and consumed by the public's insatiable appetite for private sin and public scandal. Evelyn's story has all the elements: sex and violence, love and betrayal, a teenage girl involved with a married man, an insanely jealous husband driven to murder, the fall of the rich and powerful, and the cult of celebrity. But Evelyn's life story is also so much bigger than the scandal that plagued her life. In this episode, we aim to honor Evelyn as the remarkably resilient woman she was, as the ethereal beauty that captured the eye of some of the greatest artists of her day, as a talented actress and performer, caring and loving mother, and as a wanderlust spirit with an unbreakable curiosity for the world, even in the face of great tragedy and adversity. So, without further ado, let's dive in to the incredulous life story of Evelyn Nesbit. Florence Evelyn Nesbit was born on Christmas Day 1884 in Tarentum, Pennsylvania. Her father, Winfield Scott Nesbit, who went by Win, was a lawyer, albeit a slightly unambitious one, who prioritized family time over making a profit. But what he may have lacked in income, Win certainly made up for with his sweet nature and ravishingly good looks. Her mother, Evelyn Florence Mackenzie, was also particularly good-looking and had a talent for sewing. She not only designed and made all of her own outfits, but eventually also Evelyn's. So it comes with no surprise that Evelyn was born with natural good looks. In fact, as family legend goes, Evelyn was so exceptionally pretty as an infant that she attracted curious visitors from neighboring counties. The first decade of Evelyn's childhood was largely uneventful. In the summers, Evelyn enjoyed picnics, and in the winters she went sledding and ice skating. She attended Sunday school, where she competed in spelling bees and sang in the choir. And when she was 2.5 years old, she welcomed a baby brother named Howard. Evelyn was particularly close to her father. As Evelyn later recalled, He was a charming, genial man. I have only the most tender memories of him. Evelyn cherished spending time with her father, and he in return doted upon her. When she was 5 years old, her father took her to her first Pirates baseball game. He also took notice of her early love for reading and built Evelyn her own library at home, filled with her favorite books, including Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. And when she also showed an interest in the arts, her father arranged for Evelyn to take dancing, singing, and piano lessons. A naturally curious and spirited girl, Evelyn threw herself enthusiastically into all of these activities, especially if it meant pleasing her beloved father. Though she knew that her father also loved her brother Howard, Evelyn had no doubt that she was her father's favorite. Her mother, on the other hand, seemed to favor Howard. From a young age, Evelyn felt estranged from her mother and sensed core differences between them. As Evelyn later wrote in her memoir, "I have the fullest admiration for my mother's character, but she did not understand me. I am probably the biggest enigma that the world offers her. I am outside and beyond the range of her understanding. My mother and I were temperamentally different." As we will see, Evelyn would maintain a complicated relationship with her mother well into her adulthood, a relationship that would contribute to some of the greatest tragedies of Evelyn's life. We'll continue our story after a brief word from our advertisers. Welcome back, listeners. Now let's dive back in. When Evelyn was 11 years old, her family moved to Pittsburgh, where her father was offered a new job. Because it was a center for coal production, Pittsburgh was known at the time as being the dirtiest city in America. But for Evelyn, these early days in the industrial city were bright and sunny. She enrolled in the Shakespeare Elementary School and continued to spend time with her father any chance she could get. But Evelyn's world would soon come crashing down when less than a year later, her father died without warning at the age of 40. Doctors at the time were unable to confirm his cause of death, though scholars today believe he suffered from a brain hemorrhage. How did Evelyn feel to suddenly lose her father, the man who showered her with love and attention and made her feel seen? Was she filled with sorrow, anguish, and shock? How did she grapple with the nightmare that had become her reality? When her father was buried a few days later, Evelyn felt as if her heart had been broken into a million pieces. As Evelyn later wrote, "Gone was the sense of security that my father had radiated. He had been my sun and moon, and I had been his shooting little star." Her father had been seemingly healthy and active in the weeks leading up to his death, so much so that at first Evelyn and her brother refused to believe that he could really be gone. As author Paula Uruburu described, "To the children, it was as if their father was nowhere. He had simply vanished overnight into the cold, gray cosmos. It was almost unbearable." And to make matters worse, because his death had been unexpected, Evelyn's father had not properly prepared his finances, and the family was left penniless. Within just a month of her father's death, Evelyn's family home was foreclosed on, and they were forced to auction off all of their belongings. As author Paula Uruburu continued, Evelyn, her mother, and Howard stood on the sidewalk for several hours without making a sound and watched like somnambulists while passerbys eyed them curiously. Virtually all of their possessions were sold and carted away. including all of the books in the library that Evelyn's father had picked out for her. Their world was suddenly pitched into darkness, like the deepest hole made in the earth. Gone virtually overnight were even the smallest pleasures the Nesbits once enjoyed. Evelyn was now without a father, without a home, and without a penny to her name. Evelyn and her mother and brother were forced to squeeze into a small room at a boarding house, which Evelyn later recalled smelled of meatballs and sauerkraut. This boarding house would be the first of many that Evelyn and her family would have to live in over the next few years. Though Evelyn's mother tried to look for work, she struggled to overcome her insurmountable grief. As Evelyn later described, her grief was terrible. In our strange new home, she often gave way to uncontrollable weeping. In fact, her mother wailed so intensely that Evelyn and her brother had to put a pillow over their heads to fall asleep. Evelyn, on the other hand, fell into a silent depression, locking her innermost feelings deep inside herself. She began to have intrusive thoughts about her mother dying and developed an abandonment complex, one that would rear its head many times throughout her life. As author Paula Uruburu explained, a deepening double-edged fear of rejection and abandonment was imprinted indelibly on Evelyn's young psyche, exasperated by the constant upheaval and shuffling from one tedious boarding house to the next. After 2 years of living below the poverty line, Evelyn's mother decided to move to Philadelphia in search of work as a seamstress. While she settled, Evelyn and her brother were sent to live with family in rural Pennsylvania. Their family was equally poor and barely had enough extra food to feed Evelyn and her brother. And worse, they were taken out of school and forced to do laborious household chores. After a few trying weeks, Evelyn's mother found a job at Philadelphia's famous department store, Wanamaker's, and Evelyn and her brother joined her in the city. Unfortunately, given their desperate situation, Evelyn was once again pulled out of school and forced to find work. Despite being well below the legal work age, Evelyn was also hired by Wanamaker's, where she worked 12-hour-long shifts. Even with her and her mother's incomes combined, the family barely could afford one small meal a day. Evelyn was devastated to have to continually sacrifice her schooling. To satisfy her love for reading, she borrowed free books from the library and read as much as she could in her free time. But, fortunately, Evelyn's life was about to change with a chance encounter on one cold Sunday morning. Because it was her one day off, Evelyn had decided to go for a stroll around the neighborhood when she noticed a dress shop and peered into the windows. But as she gazed into the glass, she noticed in the reflection an elderly woman standing behind her, seemingly staring at her. As Evelyn whirled around to meet her gaze, the woman approached her and asked, "Would you like to pose for a portrait?" As Evelyn later recalled, "It was there that I met Mrs. Darroch, who was an artist. She was attracted by my face and asked me if I would sit as a model for her. The idea attracted me. It seemed to me at the time to be a wonderful thing that anybody should want to paint a picture of me. It was really a wonderful joke, and I was proud as though I myself combined all the genius of Michelangelo." Bringing her mother as a chaperone, Evelyn met Mrs. Darroch at her studio later that day. Her mother was comforted by the fact that Mrs. Darroch was a woman and eventually gave her permission for Evelyn to begin modeling for her. And thus was the start of what would become Evelyn's impressive career as an artist model. She was only 14 years old. Evelyn began sitting for Mrs. Darroch on her days off from Wanamaker, earning $1 for 5 hours of work. But though she was thrilled over the extra income, Evelyn quickly realized that modeling was no easy task. As she later described, "I learned in that time the supreme value of patience. Enthusiasm for being painted died with an aching neck, and I found myself with a yearning desire to get away from the position in which the artist put me, to move my head exactly in the direction she did not wish me to look, and to fidget at moments when it was essential that I should keep quite still. Here then began the great education, an education that served me in such good stead in later years." And serve her well it did. It didn't take long for word to spread amongst Philadelphia's artists of a young ethereal beauty. It was through Mrs. Darrick that Evelyn was introduced to an entire emerging group of artists, mainly female artists, who studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Evelyn soon after began modeling for the illustrators Jessie Wilcox Smith and Elizabeth Shippen Green, who drew Evelyn in a myriad of different costumes. As author Paula Uruburu described, "As she posed in these costumes, Evelyn began to envision herself as the characters she knew so well, although it often reminded her of the precious books she had lost. She was doubly thrilled by the prospect of playing dress-up and getting paid for it." Within just a few months, Evelyn had officially made a splash amongst the Philadelphia artistic community. As author Paula Uruburu continued, "To everyone who saw her, the girl had a remarkably distinctive look that set her apart from other models and so-called beauties of the day. There was something magnetic and haunting about her large, smoky eyes and almost mournful half-smile." And Evelyn's hard work paid off, quite literally. Soon Evelyn made enough money from modeling that she was able to quit her job at Wanamaker's. Evelyn was thrilled to be able to trade in her long days at the department store for days of modeling at various art studios. As Evelyn later remarked, "I never thought of the possibility of making an income in this way. It seemed to me absurd that people should take money for being painted. When I saw that I could earn more money posing as an artist model than I could at Wanamaker's, I gave my mother no peace until she permitted me to pose for a livelihood." And more than this, her new income gave Evelyn financial freedom for the first time in her life. By the time Evelyn turned 15, she had a lot to be proud of. She was not only earning a steady income for her and her family, but had become one of the most sought-after artist models in all of Philadelphia. And as Evelyn's popularity grew amongst the city's artistic circles, she began to catch the eye of photographers. The idea of modeling for photographers greatly appealed to Evelyn, as it often required shorter modeling sessions than posing for painters or illustrators. In 1899, Evelyn was hired by the photographer Ryland Phillips, for whom she posed for a series of photographs. In one surviving photograph, we see Evelyn wrapped in a white satin gown, while leaning against a wall. She tilts her head up as she stares at the viewer straight on, as if she is daring us to meet her gaze. Her remarkable beauty is obvious. Her porcelain skin, luscious chestnut hair, and perfectly pursed lips, all testament to her resounding charm. Phillips himself remarked that Evelyn resembled a young Aphrodite. Phillips's photographs of Evelyn were published in art magazines and reproduced in city papers. With her increased exposure, Evelyn became a local celebrity, known for her extraordinary beauty. But as the century neared its close, Evelyn was ready to take her career to the next level. Now that she had made a name for herself in Philadelphia, Evelyn began to set her sights on New York City, where she hoped she could find even greater success. As author Paula Uruburu eloquently wrote, "As New Year's Eve 1899 approached and the final weeks of the 1800s were peeled away, Evelyn fantasized about how she might figure in whatever awesome changes lay ahead, in the pink New Tomorrow of 1900, and all tomorrows after that. But not even in her wildest dreams could she have predicted that the public's burning desire for the perfect emblem of their imagined perfect new age would be realized in a girl from Tarentum. We'll continue our story after a brief word from our advertisers. Welcome back, listeners. Now let's dive back in. Evelyn moved to New York City in the winter of 1900, with nothing but her good looks and aspirations for a brighter future. As her train pulled into Pennsylvania Station and she got her first glances of the big city, Evelyn's entire body lit up with excitement. Shortly after arriving, Evelyn began campaigning to find work as an artist model, carrying with her letters of recommendation from the many Philadelphia artists that she worked with. It didn't take long for Evelyn to catch the attention of one of New York's most popular painters, James Carroll Beckwith. Beckwith, who later described Evelyn as a perfectly formed nymph, hired her on the spot, and Evelyn soon after began modeling for him twice a week, both at his studio and at his life drawing classes he taught at the Art Students League of New York. There are two surviving portraits of Evelyn by Beckwith. In the first, we see Evelyn seated regally in a high-collar black dress. Her skin, white as porcelain, radiates against the abstracted brown background. Her eyes settle just beyond our gaze, giving Evelyn a mysterious and enigmatic air. Though she was only 15 years old at the time Beckwith painted her portrait, Evelyn is remarkably mature, emanating confidence and wisdom well beyond her years. The second portrait of Evelyn is far more promiscuous. Here, Evelyn opens up a black floral robe, showing off her fully bare chest. As she exposes herself, Evelyn stares at us unabashedly, her crimson lips pursed ever so slightly into a smirk. The composition cuts off just above her groin, teasing the viewer with its suggestion. Beckwith's second portrait of Evelyn certainly points to her ever-increasing maturity, despite her young age. It was through Beckwith that Evelyn made the acquaintance of another rising painter in New York, Frederick S. Church. Soon after meeting, Evelyn began modeling for Church regularly. In one surviving portrait, Church paints Evelyn in a stylish mint green bonnet. With sparkling eyes, rouged cheeks, and crimson lips, Evelyn smiles at the viewer mysteriously, not unlike the Mona Lisa. There is a playfulness about Evelyn, as if she might burst into laughter at any moment and bring us into her fun. Here, Evelyn exudes enigma, charm, and frivolousness. It was also around this time that Evelyn was introduced to the famed American illustrator Charles Dana Gibson, who hired Evelyn as a model for one of his Gibson Girl works, a series meant to showcase the new modern woman. Titled Woman, the Eternal Question, Gibson draws Evelyn in profile, her long hair flowing below, forming the shape of a question mark. Her eyes are downcast, as if she is blinking coquettishly, and her eyebrows are slightly raised. Set against a white background, Evelyn's delicate nose and perfectly shaped lips are on full display. Here, Gibson highlights Evelyn as the ideal example of the woman of the new century, youthful, graceful, and effortlessly stylish. Within just a few months in New York, Evelyn had become a favorite model amongst the city's best artists, posing for a number of painters, illustrators, sculptors, and photographers. And as Evelyn got more and more exposure, the press began to catch word of a new young beauty taking the art world by storm. Not before long, newspapers began publishing photos of Evelyn, crowning her New York's newest it girl. In the subsequent media storm that followed, Evelyn was featured on the cover of numerous magazines, including Cosmopolitan, Harper's Bazaar, and Vanity Fair. She also became the face of advertisements for a variety of different products, such as soap, chocolate, and furs, to less innocuous products like tobacco cards and beer trays. Evelyn even posed for company calendars, including Coca-Cola and Prudential Life Insurance, becoming arguably America's first official pinup girl. As author Paula Uruburu described, her evocative and soon familiar face launched any number of advertising campaigns as canny entrepreneurs began to capitalize on her uncanny ability to appeal to both sexes and appear chaste and alluring at the same time. By the end of Evelyn's first year in New York, her image could be seen all over the city, from billboards to magazines and even to the Metropolitan Museum, where some of her portraits hung. Though only 16 years old, Evelyn was already being celebrated as an icon of her age and was one of the most talked about women in all of America. As author Paula Uruburu eloquently wrote, like Cinderella stepping from the pages of her storybook, the little girl from the outskirts of the sooty city rose seemingly overnight, from deprivation and obscurity, to become what one reporter called the glittering girl model of Gotham. So it's only fitting that this rising star would be invited to showcase her beauty and talent on the city's biggest stage, Broadway. As Evelyn grew in popularity, theater producers began approaching her with offers to join different productions. At first, Evelyn and her mother were hesitant. Evelyn was making a steady flow of income as an artist model, and Broadway was known to have a seedy reputation. But as time went on, Evelyn began to resent being an artist model. She was tired of the long hours spent in uncomfortable poses and being surrounded by stuffy older artists. Young and restless, Evelyn began to crave the thrill that Broadway could offer her. As author Paula Uruburu explained, as far as Evelyn could see, being on the magical stage where she could woo an audience full of living, responsible people was a vast improvement over the decidedly mundane studios, populated by dismally sedate artists. And in addition, having already had her picture featured in several theatrical magazines, the celebrated girl model was convinced that she could be supremely different to the position she might occupy in the spotlight. As she described it years later, she only wanted to be in it and see what else the world had to offer. Evelyn was soon after introduced to John C. Fisher, the manager of one of Broadway's most popular shows, Florodora, a musical comedy set in the Philippines. Fisher was clearly taken by Evelyn's undeniable beauty, but was tentative to hire a girl so young. After some back and forth, he decided to offer Evelyn a trial as a chorus girl. Still working as an artist model by day, Evelyn spent long nights learning choreography and developing her craft as a performer. But though it was hard work, Evelyn enjoyed every minute of this new experience the stage offered her. As she later recalled, "My interest in life, never flagging, grew in intensity. I was permeated with the delight of living. Every day held a mystery, revealed a beautiful experience. So when I am asked in what spirit I approach the stage and the career it offered me, I say I approach the stage as I would a virgin forest today, with a bubbling sense of happiness in the revelations that would open to me. I remember the eagerness with which I began my work, my anxiety to perfect myself for the unimportant duties that were mine. I wanted to rehearse all the time. Everybody seemed so kind to me. Girls I did not know did everything they could to help me along." A few weeks into her trial period, Evelyn was officially offered a part as a chorus girl. making her the youngest member of the entire company. Though her part was small, Evelyn still wanted to make a good impression on the audience, and she was filled with anxious butterflies before each performance. She even created a pre-show ritual in which she chanted childhood nursery rhymes under her breath to remain calm. But her nerves dissipated as soon as her waltzing feet hit the stage, and she reveled in the glow of the spotlight. And more than the thrill of the big lights, Evelyn cherished the camaraderie amongst the chorus girls. She often joined her fellow castmates at parties after their performances, sometimes even staying out until sunrise. As Evelyn later described of this exciting time, the days passed rapidly. New and pleasant people came flocking into my life and disappeared again. All went cheerily and happily, posing as a model by day, rushing to the play at night, the parties that so often ended when the day had begun anew. All these pleasant things made this an extremely happy period of my life. Then, into my life came Stanford White. We'll continue our story after a brief word from our advertisers. Welcome back, listeners. Now let's dive back in. At the turn of the century, Stanford White was one of the most powerful and beloved men in all of New York. His architectural firm, McKim, Mead & White, were responsible for designing some of the city's greatest buildings, such as the original Madison Square Garden and Penn Station, the New York Herald Building, the Municipal Building, much of Columbia University, and even the Washington Square Arch. In fact, he was behind so much new development that White was single-handedly credited for New York's metamorphosis at the start of the 20th century. Though Evelyn was just a chorus girl, when Stanford White attended a performance of Florodora in the fall of 1901, he was immediately taken by her remarkable beauty. After the performance, he approached another chorus girl and asked her to invite Evelyn to a lunch he was hosting. Evelyn knew she could not accept the invitation without her mother's permission, and at first her mother was hesitant to allow Evelyn to lunch with a strange older man. Knowing that White was not the kind of man to say no to, the chorus girl insisted that Evelyn join, and assured Evelyn's mother that White was one of the nicest gentlemen in all of New York. After much persuasion, Evelyn's mother relented and gave Evelyn her permission to attend. That early afternoon, Evelyn's fellow chorus girl picked her up in a car arranged for by White. As Evelyn looked out the window, she was filled with a sense of elated anticipation. As author Paula Uruburu described, after having been cooped up in a monotonous succession of identical boarding house rooms, claustrophobic stock rooms, cluttered yet hollow studios, and bare-boned rehearsal halls for what seemed like an eternity, the teenager, eager for friendship and expanded horizons, was in a state of euphoria. And Evelyn's awe only continued when they stepped inside White's building. As the doors opened, Evelyn had never before seen a room so lavish and beautifully decorated. As author Paula Uruburu continued, Evelyn attempted to appear as nonchalant as her companion, but to little avail. She saw in an instant that this setting easily transcended the feeble-minded glamour attempted by the theater. The place struck her as something out of Arabian Nights. She gazed at the scene again, half expecting the carpets to rise and fly around the room. Evelyn, however, was far less taken by their host. When White stepped forward, Evelyn was shocked by his imposing height and flaming red hair. She was also surprised that someone of his age would take any interest in two young chorus girls. At 46 years old, White was almost 3 times Evelyn's age. But as they sat for lunch, Evelyn's hesitations were quelled by the magnificent feast that lay before her eyes. Steaks from the popular steakhouse Delmonico's, oysters on ice, and lobster Newburgh. As Evelyn quickly filled her plate to the brim, her mouth watered with excitement. White even allowed each of the girls to have a glass of champagne. And while she was distracted with her decadent meal, White eyed Evelyn with increasing intrigue. He had never before seen a girl quite like Evelyn, who exuded a unique innocence and childlike curiosity. As author Paula Uruburu wrote, it only became clear to Evelyn years later that White's fascination with her, which became increasingly obvious as the afternoon progressed, was due to the fact that she was simply and intriguingly different from the norm. After lunch, White invited Evelyn and her fellow chorus girl to see some of his rooms upstairs. Amply impressed with White's space, the girls excitedly followed White up the stairs. As they neared the top floor, Evelyn noticed a large velvet swing with ropes that extended all the way up to the ceiling. Before even asking for permission, Evelyn burst forward and threw herself on the swing, thrusting her legs until she went soaring into the air. White, elated with Evelyn's enthusiasm, stood behind her and began pushing her with a mighty force. Evelyn squealed with titillation. As author Paula Uruburu described, the heady combination of a glass of good champagne, sumptuous food, and the lush surroundings of his fantastic, enchanted forest, combined with White's visible admiration for her charms, proved intoxicating to Evelyn beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. Evelyn's magical afternoon eventually came to an end around 4 p.m, when White left for a business meeting. As Evelyn later described of this initial meeting, my first experience of Mr. White was that he was very unprepossessing, very kindly, and that he was safe. He did not treat me with any great ceremony, but he was courteous, attentive, and took an interest in my life. He exercised an almost fatherly supervision over what I ate and was particularly solicitous as to what I drank. But what Evelyn did not know at the time was what seemed like an innocent afternoon would be the start of White's calculated grooming of her, slowly earning her trust to later take advantage of her when she was most vulnerable. As Evelyn recalled, it was amusing. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I did not realize that childish fun could have any serious significance. I did not realize that this prepossessing and kindly man could have any other object in view than to amuse me. A few days after their initial meeting, White sent a letter to Evelyn's mother inviting her to his office. This was White's first step towards winning Evelyn's mother's trust. During this meeting, White expressed his profuse care for Evelyn and his desire to both help further her career on Broadway and take care of her and her family. White even offered to pay for a dentist to fix Evelyn's front tooth, which he said spoiled her otherwise faultless beauty. Pouring on his calculated charm, White was able to win Evelyn's mother over, and she walked out of the meeting with deep admiration for him. A few days later, Evelyn's mother took Evelyn to White's dentist to have her front tooth fixed to White's liking. Under the guise of charity, this was one of White's early ways of grooming Evelyn. Evelyn was now flawless in his eyes. White continued to court Evelyn over the course of the next few weeks. He treated her to expensive meals and sent her flowers, books, candy, and toys from the famous store F.A.O. Schwartz. And more than this, he began to fill Evelyn's gaping heart with the paternal love she so desperately needed and missed. As author Paula Uruburu wrote, it is not surprising that a freshly captivated Evelyn saw in White, however subconsciously, a man like her father, who was attentive, fun-loving, and extremely clever. He was courteous and considerate, always able to make her feel she was special. He kept to his word when he promised something and seemed to take a sincere interest in her life and career, exercising an almost fatherly supervision over everything she did. White even moved Evelyn and her mother into an apartment at the Wellington Hotel that he designed himself, as well as paid for her brother to be sent to boarding school. He also hired a piano teacher for Evelyn so that she could continue her music lessons from childhood, and bought her a small library of books, just as her father had once done. And it wasn't only Evelyn who began to see White as the family's new benefactor. Evelyn's mother soon also appreciated White as a stand-in father. As Evelyn later explained, Mother and Stanford White were quite good friends. He visited her on several occasions. He was always very courteous in his relationship. Mother was impressed by his anxiety for my welfare. He was so safe a man, so eminently solid, that my mother might well be excused for regarding him as a heaven-sent friend of the family, a veritable second father. But White's motives were far from selfless. From the moment he first laid eyes on Evelyn, it's clear that White had become completely consumed by her and wanted to make her his next conquest. As author Paula Uruburu described, to White, Evelyn was the ultimate combination of unfettered intellectual curiosity, singular precocious beauty, and an adorable lack of sophistication, all rolled into one willing and uninhibited child woman. An art lover, White even went as far as saying Evelyn looked like a Botticelli figure come to life, with porcelain skin, long, luscious hair, and a graceful, slender figure. White immediately set to work to win Evelyn and her mother's trust, so that he could eventually have Evelyn all to himself. Every gift, every meal, and every generous offer were calculated moves meant to manipulate his next victim. And like any predator, White had sniffed out his victim's vulnerabilities. He quickly learned that Evelyn had lost her father at a young age and desperately missed his presence. He also knew that Evelyn and her mother had experienced dire poverty after her father's death, and that they both feared going back to an impoverished state. By playing the role of benefactor and stand-in father, White was consciously taking advantage of Evelyn's two greatest pain points, until she and her family were slowly but surely dependent upon him. It was in this grooming phase that White also began to hire photographers to take Evelyn's portrait, photographs that he would keep in his private scrapbooks. The most famous of these pictures was taken by the female photographer Gertrude Caspier in 1903. When White brought Evelyn to Caspier's studio to be photographed, she was awestruck over Evelyn's beauty. And one can feel that immense admiration in Caspier's sultry portrait of Evelyn. In the photograph, Evelyn sits on a velvet chair, leaning forward seductively. She wears a white linen dress which fully exposes her shoulders and upper chest. With her face turned upwards ever so slightly, Evelyn stares at the viewer directly, with an almost intimidating unabashedness. As a cataloger of Caspier's work described, no other portrait of Evelyn more fully suggests her ripe, youthful beauty as Caspier's. Caspier presents her as coquette. She seems unnervingly close to the viewer, an effect that Caspier achieved by cropping the top of her head and by photographing her slightly from above. Her unturned head seems to offer a kiss, while her right hand profers a small pitcher. Yet her torso recedes, so that this temptress seems both to move forward and resist. Although her empire-style gown suggests the past, the direct gaze shows Evelyn Nesbit is no coy 18th century maiden. Today, Caspier's photograph of Evelyn is one of her most recognizable portraits. White remained on good behavior until November of 1901, when his relationship with Evelyn would take a dark turn. It was around this time that White began to convince Evelyn's mother to travel back to Pittsburgh to visit her family and old acquaintances. As he said to her mother, "You ought to visit your Pittsburgh friends. It is never advisable to drop people out of your life. Why don't you run over to Pittsburgh and see them?" But Evelyn's mother was hesitant. She had never before left Evelyn without supervision, and she did not think leaving her alone in New York City was a good idea. To this, White smiled and said, "Well, I'm here. She can hardly be alone when I am around to look after her." Because White had spent the last few months meticulously earning Evelyn's mother's trust, she eventually relented. She felt she could depend on White to take good care of Evelyn, and that Evelyn would be in safe hands. As Evelyn later explained, Mother thought the world of Stanford White. He was such a proud man, so kind, so thoughtful, and above all things, so safe. Eventually, Mother decided on the trip, and Stanford White secured the facilities that enabled her to make the journey without expense to herself. Not only did White convince Evelyn's mother to leave, but he even paid for her entire voyage. The following day, White called Evelyn and asked her to come with him to the photographer Rudolf Eichmeyer's studio. This did not seem out of the ordinary, as White had arranged for Evelyn's photograph to be taken on a number of occasions. When Evelyn arrived, White began dressing her in a variety of costumes, furs, ballroom gowns, and decadent jewelry. But none seemed to White's liking. He eventually settled on a Japanese kimono, which suited Evelyn so much that he told her she could keep it after the shoot. He then instructed Evelyn to sit upon a massive rug made from a real polar bear, with the head still attached. Evelyn began modeling in a variety of different poses, but White's relentless direction eventually exhausted her so much that she decided to close her eyes, resting her head upon the polar bears. As Evelyn quickly fell into a deep sleep, Eichmeyer began to photograph her. The resulting image is one of Evelyn's most notorious. Curled in her kimono, Evelyn's limp body rests upon the animal's white fur. With her eyes closed and deep in respite, Evelyn looks angelic and is the picture of childhood innocence. What Evelyn did not know at the time was that this would be one of her last moments to enjoy an innocence that would soon be taken from her. And this photo would forever capture the sleeping girl whose life would never again be the same. The following day, White brought Evelyn to his office. When he saw his partner Charles McKim, he teasingly said, "This little girl's mother has gone out of town and left her in my care." McKim stared at the young and innocent Evelyn with knowing eyes. "My God," was his only reply. It seems that those close to White knew about his predatory behavior and assumed it was only a matter of time before White made Evelyn his latest victim. As author Paula Uruburu described, but those who knew White and his peculiarities more intimately waited with bated breath for the other shoe to drop. Evelyn never questioned until it was too late why, although Stanford White was a notorious man in New York, there were none who warned her. In the hours that would follow, White would finally show his true colors. After winning Evelyn's trust and feigning the role of father, and after sending her mother away, leaving Evelyn alone, White would swoop in on his prey. Though she didn't know it at the time, Evelyn was about to experience the worst night of her life, a night that would not only rob her of her childhood innocence and virginity, but would haunt her for years to come. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of our episode on Evelyn Nesbit. We will continue Evelyn's story in part 2 of this episode. I have included images, resources, and suggestions for further reading on the ArtMuse website and Instagram. ArtMuse is produced by Kula Production Company. Today's episode was written by me, your host, Grace Anna. Stay tuned as I continue to share the stories of the women behind some of the world's most important works of art. Until next time, bye for now.